Hey guys, my name is Jonathan. I'm 30 years old. I fish primarily in Illinois, and I am an ultralight angler primarily for steelhead and salmon. Today we're going to be talking about how to catch steelhead on the lakefront, so primarily in the harbors, um, with a technique called float and fly. So what are steelhead? Steelhead are migratory rainbow trout. They're identical to rainbow trout, whether they migrate or not. It's just how their lifestyle is dictates whether or not they are steelhead. So where do we fish? Like I said, we fish harbors where they are stocked. So they're stocked in Lake Michigan by DNR for recreational fishing. They're not native there. So is salmon. Same thing. So when do I like to fish for these fish? I like to go mid-October all the way to about mid-March. It really just depends on the water temperature. You can go earlier or later. I like to fish underneath 60-degree water temperatures. And if you want to monitor that, a good place to go would be Seagull. If you look up Seagull, Great Lakes water temperature on Google, it'll pop up. And then there's like different buoys that you can click on and it'll tell you the water temperature there. Okay, so now that we know what they are, where to fish for them, and why they're there, what do we use? For me, during that time frame, the most reliable way to catch them would be a float and fly. I gotta admit, it's not the most exciting way to fish, but this is my most reliable way of catching them, by far. And I think a lot of people that have fished this would agree with that statement. So let's talk about the tackle first. Let's talk about the rod and reel. So if you're new to fishing or if you're new to steelhead fishing, I would probably go with ideally a 9-foot long rod, probably like a medium or medium light. And then I'll probably use like a 2500 or 3000 size reel. And I'd fish with probably 8 to 10 pound braided line. You could use mono too. I just find that the low stretch in the braided line really helps with setting the hook properly on these fish, especially when you have so much line out. So that's the ideal setup. Let's talk about some of the terminal tackle. So this is a sliding float made by Phil. It's the Phil Gold Medal float. And what I do is I put some bobber stops here. So this is fluorocarbon. I tie that directly to my braided main line with a double uni knot. I have 4 here because I fish with ultralight tackle. This is 4-pound test. Like I said, if you're new, I'd probably go to 8 to 10. I have a bead here to stop the bobber from going past this. And then I have a bullet weight, which is the maximum capacity of this bobber, which in this case is 1/8 ounce. I like to use like a matte color. I don't like using flashy lead color. I think the more you could do to kind of be stealthy, the better. So I also have another like little bobber stop there to protect my uni knot. And then there's a little tiny Gamakatsu. I think that's a number 8 size swivel. Then I have more fluorocarbon. This is about 4.5 to 6 feet, depending on the depth that I'm fishing. I prefer a little bit shorter, so like 5 foot, 4.5, but 6 foot if I'm in a little bit deeper water. What's cool is that you can move this bobber stop and this bobber stop here about a foot, and then you can fish deeper if you wanted to. So another important aspect of this rig is going to be a loop knot. So what the loop knot does is it helps it kind of stay in place horizontally like this, whereas a uni knot can kind of squeeze it and be in the front right here, and it'll be like at an angle or like directly up and down, and you don't want that. So what I do is a canoeman loop knot. Literally, it takes me like 2 seconds to tie it. Right? Take my jig, push it through, and then so that's the canoeman loop knot. It's pretty much gonna sit like that, but that's the ideal presentation you would want. The loop knot, like I said, is very important. The canoeman loop knot is awesome because it's a very small loop that you get. It's not super big. I can go a lot smaller than this. It's just I was rushing for the sake of the video. The uni knot is much stronger than this, and the benefit to that is that if you get hung up, or if you need to break off for whatever reason, you're only losing your hair jig. If you lose all of this, it sucks ass to retie all of this back together. So let's talk about the jig. This is probably the most important aspect of this. So this is a 1/32 ounce hair jig. I make my own, so I paint the jig head and then I tie the body and tail material. So colors I like for the jig head would be gold, orange, pink, white, black, purple. You could pretty much use whatever color. Those are my confidence colors though. So gold and purple are probably my two, and then if the water is a little bit more stained, I'd probably go like orange or pink, just to give it a little bit more visibility. For the body and the tail, I like using olive, brown, black. Those are the three colors you could ever possibly need. Those are very natural, but since we're suspending it underneath the bobber, when the fish is looking up at it on an overcast sky, which is ideal, or even a bright sky, it casts a shadow, a silhouette, and between a white background, a dark silhouette is very high contrast and it's very easy to see, which is kind of important because these are small hair jigs. 1/32 ounce is my favorite because it's heavy enough to where if I cast this bullet weight is the main propulsion system for this when you're casting it, by the way. So when I'm casting this can get tangled. The 1/32 ounce, right before this hits the water, I'll stop it with my hands on the spool, and this is heavy enough to slingshot past and prevent it from tangling. It also has a really nice slow fall rate versus like, let's say a 1/8 falls pretty quickly. This will take about, depending on the length between the bobber, anywhere from like 8 to 15 seconds. It also depends on the current, but let's not get into that. So it has a nice slow fall rate. It's really small. It's unassuming. It's very finesse. And then I just kind of just let it sit there in place for about a minute. Literally, I'll count out to like 60 seconds. And a lot of people are thinking, okay, why are you just letting it sit there? There's no action. Wrong. So when you're fishing, usually it's not super dead glass calm, right? There's usually ripples on the water. And this bobber will move up and down with those ripples a tiny amount. The reason why we fish with hair and feathers is because in the cold temperatures, this will move up and down with the bobber. And just leaving it alone is enough for them to eat them. Actually, that's all you need for them to eat it. The reason why I recommended that longer rod is for line management, right? So when you have it casted out, make sure you keep that line as tight as possible because there's always going to be slack between the bobber and the hair jig. So now that you have it, you let it sit. Let's say you don't get a bite, right? So what I do is I inch this back to me about 10 feet. So I'll literally go down, reel up the slack, down, reel up the slack, down, reel up the slack. And so what that looks like in the water is like boom, boom, boom. It'll keep going up till about 10 feet, and then it'll drop back down slowly. And then it'll suspend right there again. That's basically the action of it. I repeat it. I wait another 30 seconds at the very minimum, all the way up to a minute. The reason why I do it up to a minute is because I've actually seen them with my drone. I'll insert a clip of that here. So here, this is actually my second cast to this fish because in the first try, it denied it. So this just landed in the water and you can see it's in its range of vision. And it's just slowly kind of creeping towards that hair jig. It's just looking at it. And there's actually a little bit of natural current here, even though it's glass calm. So there is a little bit of movement with that jig. And it's just slowly going towards the fish. And that was completely enough action for this fish. So if you watch here, you'll see this fish just kind of slowly swim up to it. Let's just wait. So yeah, now it's getting closer to it. And now it decided, okay, let's check it out. It slowly swims up to it. And then you can see it opens its mouth right there. And you can barely even see the bobber move. I think the bite can be pretty obvious. A lot of the times it'll just go straight down. Sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes they, like in the drone footage you see, they just open their mouth and they close it and they sit in place. And you'll just see this bobber move up and down like this with the ripples, right? And then it'll just go like, it'll go down a little bit and it'll just stay there. And so, yeah, sometimes they bite like that, so you really need to pay attention to this bobber. Any kind of like odd movements, just the best thing to do would be to reel tight until you feel weight. If you feel weight, sweep your rod to the left, sweep your rod to the right, and then your fish is on. You don't need to do like a super hard hook set. But if you don't have a fish on, it could be a small fish or it could be a very smart fish where it just nips the tail and then you pull it out of its mouth. In that scenario, I will let it sit. I'll stop reeling, I'll let it sink back down, and then I'll just let it sit there. Or if it's calm, super calm, I'll twitch it a little bit, and a lot of the times they'll come back and eat it. And an aspect that's really important to note there would be adding scent to your jig. A lot of people, what they do is they put waxworms on the tip, or small pieces of shrimp. To me, that's kind of unnatural looking, so I like using the gel scent. So this is made by Patsky, but you can use whatever. And I just put a teeny tiny amount on the jig head. That's it. That's all I do. If you put too much, it'll bleed into the feathers or the hair and it'll ruin the action. So a little goes a long way. When I fish about like 4 to 6 hours, I only reapply maybe like one other time. So 2 to 3 times max with a tiny amount. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of focus to just look at this bobber for hours. So like I said, it's not for everybody, but it is a very reliable way of catching them. When you're fighting the fish, make sure your drag is set properly, just enough to kind of set the hook on that fish, but not too tight that you'll break off. So just keep that in mind. After you play every single fish, just make sure you check your drag again, because I've been there where I had loose drag and then I lose a fish. So if you guys have any questions about this technique or other techniques regarding salmon and steelhead, or any kind of ultralight questions, just post a comment, send me a direct message, either on Facebook or on my Instagram at ninj_srg. So thanks for watching, guys.